Welcome to another deep dive, and this time we're venturing into a world that often feels like it's straight out of a spy thriller.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it?
But sadly, it's very much our reality. We're talking about spyware, its impact on global privacy, and the chilling effect it has, particularly on journalists and those living under authoritarian regimes.
Right, and the article you shared by Juanma Soynadie really shines a light on this.
Oh, absolutely. His insights are invaluable. For those who might not be familiar, Soynadie is a seasoned war correspondent and the founder of Deep True Project. He's been on the ground in some of the world's most volatile regions, witnessing the evolution of spyware firsthand.
His work is just exceptional, really is.
So let's get into it, shall we? Soynadie starts by taking us back to the almost comical early days of spyware. You know those images of spies lugging around bulky briefcases?
Yeah, like something out of a bad movie.
Exactly. But as he points out, things have changed, and drastically so.
Oh, absolutely. It's hard to fathom how quickly we've gone from that clunky hardware to the sophisticated AI-powered programs we have today.
Right. The kind that can infect your device with just an email, a text message, even a Wi-Fi connection.
That really is mind-boggling.
And Soynadie shares a chilling example from his time covering the genocide in Sudan back in 2023. He saw both the Sudanese army and the rebels using spyware
wow.
to monitor communications and track their opponents.
It's a disturbing shift, isn't it? The move from targeted surveillance of individuals to this mass surveillance capability.
It really is. And with companies selling these tools more and more, it's not just powerful nations or intelligence agencies that have access anymore.
Exactly. That's the scary part.
Now, Soynadie delves into some of the biggest names in the spyware game: Pegasus, RCS, Fisher, describing them as tools as sought after by dictators as AK-47s.
It's a chilling thought for sure.
It is. And his point is that this isn't about national security or stopping terrorism anymore. These tools are being used to silence dissent, control information, and solidify power.
You got it. So let's talk about what Soynadie calls the dictator's choice: Pegasus. He claims it can access practically everything on your device: calls, messages, photos, even your camera and microphone.
It's incredibly invasive.
Yeah, it is. Exploiting vulnerabilities to gain complete access, essentially turning your phone into a window into your entire life.
Scary stuff.
And the real-world examples he gives are frankly disturbing. Dictators using Pegasus to spy on their lovers, political opponents, journalists.
It's a complete abuse of power.
And it gets even more unsettling. He mentions the Argentinian government staging a fake terrorist attack to justify using Pegasus and strengthen their relationship with Israel.
It just shows the lengths some regimes will go to justify using these tools.
Wait, they faked a terrorist attack? That's just another level.
It really highlights the danger of how this technology can be used to manipulate narratives and potentially even incite violence. It's unbelievable. And the fact that he also mentions Morocco's king using Pegasus to infect the phone of Spain's president, it's like no one is safe, not even world leaders.
Yeah, that incident sent shockwaves through the international community, didn't it?
Definitely did. It really raises questions about diplomacy and international relations in a world where anyone, even the most powerful, are vulnerable to this kind of digital espionage.
It's a new world, that's for sure.
So with all of this in mind, how can someone tell if their device might be infected? Soynadie does mention some red flags to look out for.
Yeah, like your phone overheating, reduced battery life, strange noises during calls. Those could be signs that something's running in the background that shouldn't be. But you have to remember, spyware is designed to be stealthy.
Right. It's not always going to be obvious. And he mentions how difficult it can be to clean an infected device. Even for the tech-savvy, reinstalling the operating system might not be enough.
That's because some of these programs can burrow deep into the device's firmware or BIOS, like the underlying code that controls your hardware. If it's embedded there, it's nearly impossible to remove.
So even doing a complete wipe of your phone might not get rid of it.
That's right.
That's scary.
It's a digital parasite.
So if even reinstalling the operating system doesn't work, what can we do to protect ourselves? I mean, short of living off the grid completely.
Well, Soynadie does suggest some countermeasures that journalists and activists are using. Things like using secure operating systems, burner phones, even going back to basics with old Nokia models. Those are much harder to hack.
We'll get into those countermeasures in a bit. But first, I think we need to understand the full scope of this. Let's talk about how this technology is being used to manipulate evidence and potentially frame people for crimes they didn't commit.
Yeah, that's one of the most chilling aspects of all of this, isn't it? It really is. We've talked about spyware being used for surveillance, but Soynadie goes a step further. He describes how governments are using it to not just monitor people, but to manipulate evidence, potentially even frame individuals for crimes they didn't commit.
It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, but the fact that he's seen this firsthand makes it all the more disturbing. How is this even possible? Can you explain how this manipulation works?
Well, imagine this. Spyware gives the attacker complete access to your device, meaning they can plant files, alter existing data, even manipulate timestamps to make it seem like you created or accessed information you never did.
So you could be framed for sending a threatening message or accessing illegal websites even though you never did any of that.
Exactly. And proving your innocence in that kind of scenario would be incredibly difficult. The very nature of digital evidence makes it susceptible to manipulation, and proving that something's been tampered with is a complex, often impossible task.
Soynadie paints a very bleak picture of what this means for justice systems around the world. He argues that if we can't trust the integrity of digital evidence, the very foundations of due process and fair trials are at risk.
Yeah, and he's particularly concerned about the chilling effect this could have on free speech and dissent. If people fear being falsely accused based on fabricated evidence, they're less likely to speak out against injustice or criticize those in power.
He gives some stark examples of how this is already playing out. He mentions Argentina, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Hungary, and Morocco, all using spyware to target journalists, activists, and political opponents.
And what's alarming is that this isn't limited to countries with traditionally authoritarian regimes. Soynadie points to instances in Spain, France, the UK, even the US and Germany, where spyware has been used to monitor journalists and suppress dissent.
It's starting to feel like nowhere is safe. Is anyone actually trying to stop this? I mean, surely there are laws against this kind of thing?
There are laws, yes, but the problem is that technology is evolving faster than the legislation. And in many cases, the very governments tasked with upholding the law are the ones exploiting these tools for their own purposes.
It's like the fox guarding the henhouse.
In some ways, yes. Soynadie argues that we need stronger international regulations and independent oversight to ensure that these technologies are only being used for legitimate purposes and not for political repression or personal gain.
He even claims that the United States infected and spied on 75% of European and Arab leaders' phones. It's a huge accusation, and one that has sparked quite a lot of controversy.
It's a bold claim, but it does align with what we've learned from previous whistleblowers like Edward Snowden. The revelations about mass surveillance programs like PRISM and X-Keyscore showed us that governments are willing to go to extraordinary lengths to collect data, even on their allies.
So what can we do about all of this? It's easy to feel overwhelmed and powerless in the face of such sophisticated technology. Soynadie does suggest some practical countermeasures, right?
He does. He talks about the importance of basic digital hygiene, using strong passwords, two-factor authentication, being wary of phishing attempts, and being careful about the links we click and the files we download.
But he also acknowledges that even those precautions might not be enough, especially with those zero-click exploits he described. Those sound particularly terrifying. Your device can be infected without you even clicking on anything. Can you explain how those work?
Zero-click exploits are a type of attack that relies on vulnerabilities in the software of our devices. They don't require any action from the user, like clicking a link or opening a file. The attacker simply sends a specially crafted message to the device, and if there's a vulnerability, the spyware can be installed without the user ever knowing.
So even receiving a text message from an unknown number could potentially compromise your device.
In theory, yes. That's why these exploits are so dangerous. They bypass traditional security measures and are incredibly difficult to detect.
So what about antivirus software? Can't that protect us from this kind of thing?
Soynadie is somewhat skeptical about the effectiveness of traditional antivirus software, particularly against these more sophisticated threats. He argues that while antivirus can be helpful in blocking known malware, they're often playing catch-up, trying to identify threats that have already been released into the wild.
He even suggests that some antivirus programs might have backdoors that could actually make devices more vulnerable to spyware.
It's not entirely implausible. There have been cases where antivirus companies have been found to be collecting user data or even cooperating with governments in surveillance programs.
So if we can't even trust antivirus software, what hope is there? Are we just supposed to accept that our privacy is gone and there's nothing we can do about it?
Soynadie wouldn't say that. He does offer some more robust solutions, particularly for those who are at higher risk of being targeted, like journalists and activists.
Like what? What can people who are truly at risk do to protect themselves?
He talks about secure operating systems like Graphene OS and Tails, which are designed with privacy and security in mind. They're not as user-friendly as mainstream operating systems, but they offer a much higher level of protection.
You also mentioned burner phones, right? Those disposable phones you see in spy movies.
Yeah, burner phones can be a good option for high-risk communications because they're not tied to your identity and can be easily disposed of. He even suggests using old Nokia models, the kind of dumb phones that were popular a decade ago.
Why Nokia phones specifically? What makes them more secure?
They're much simpler devices with limited internet connectivity and fewer features that can be exploited by spyware. They're not as convenient as modern smartphones, but they offer a much higher level of security.
So it's a trade-off between convenience and security. And what about this Deep True project that he founded? How does that fit into all of this?
Deep True Project is Soynadie's attempt to fight back against the rising tide of disinformation and digital manipulation. He's working to develop secure operating systems for phones and computers, platforms that are designed to resist spyware and protect privacy.
It sounds like a really ambitious project. Can a small organization like that really compete with the resources and expertise of governments and intelligence agencies?
It's a David versus Goliath battle for sure, but Soynadie believes it's a fight worth having. He sees it as a way to empower individuals and journalists, giving them the tools they need to defend themselves against these threats.
So it's not just about technical solutions. It's about raising awareness, educating people about the risks, and advocating for change.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that privacy is a fundamental human right and that we need to be proactive in protecting it. It's about demanding greater transparency and accountability from governments and tech companies.
And ultimately, it's about empowering individuals to take control of their own digital security.
That's the key takeaway here. We don't have to be passive victims in this digital age. We can educate ourselves, we can demand better from those in power, and we can support initiatives like Deep True Project that are working to develop solutions and empower individuals.
So where do we go from here? What can individuals do to make a difference?
Yeah, it really feels like we've uncovered a whole web of threats, but also, thankfully, some potential solutions.
Right.
I mean, Soynadie doesn't just leave us hanging with a sense of dread. He offers some paths forward. And what stood out to me was his emphasis on Deep True Project. It's not just about building tech, though, is it?
You're right. It's about, it's about shifting that power dynamic. Soynadie sees it as a way to equip journalists, activists, really anyone concerned about privacy, and give them the tools to actually fight back.
Yeah.
He's developing secure operating systems specifically designed to resist spyware.
It almost sounds utopian, though, this idea of a truly secure digital space. Is that even achievable, do you think? Well, it's certainly challenging, no doubt, but I don't think it's impossible.
Sure.
Soynadie's approach is, it's multifaceted. It's not just, heads down, building software. He's trying to foster a community, bring together developers, security experts, privacy advocates, people dedicated to creating a more secure digital landscape, but also a more equitable one.
So it's a movement as much as a technology project.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Okay. But let's zoom in on the individual level.
Yeah.
What can our listeners do right now to protect themselves? Besides, of course, supporting initiatives like Deep True Project.
Well, I think Soynadie makes a good point when he stresses that knowledge is our first line of defense. Just being aware of the risks, understanding how these technologies work, recognizing those potential threats.
Yeah.
That's crucial.
He talks about being mindful of our digital footprint too, right?
Yeah.
Thinking twice about what we share, who we interact with online, what links we click on, all of that.
Exactly. Making informed choices about our digital lives, using strong passwords, enabling two-factor authentication, being wary of those phishing emails, suspicious links. Basic steps, but essential.
Okay. What about secure operating systems, though, like Graphene OS and Tails he talked about?
Right.
Are those really realistic options for the average person?
They are definitely more secure than, mainstream operating systems, but I'll be honest, they do require a higher level of technical expertise to use. They're not as user-friendly.
Yeah.
But, for people who are truly at risk, journalists, activists, anyone living under, an authoritarian regime, they offer a significant increase in protection.
Okay. And those burner phones, old Nokia models he mentioned,
Right.
are those actually viable for, everyday use?
They can be. It really depends on your needs and your risk tolerance,
Right.
I guess. Burner phones offer a high level of anonymity, but they're not really a long-term solution. And those old Nokia phones, while they're incredibly hard to hack, let's be honest, they lack the features and functionality of a modern smartphone. It's a trade-off. Security versus convenience.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like there's no one-size-fits-all solution. The best approach really depends on individual circumstances and assessing the risk.
Absolutely. And remember, security it's an ongoing process. It's not like you reach a destination and you're done.
Right.
Technology evolves, and so do the threats, right? We need to stay informed, adapt our security practices, and keep advocating for stronger protections.
Soynadie also talks about the need for broader societal change.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just about individuals protecting themselves. We need systemic change.
Oh, 100%. He calls for greater transparency and accountability from, governments and tech companies. We need regulations to actually prevent the abuse of these technologies, independent oversight to ensure they're being used for legitimate purposes.
And he also emphasizes, I thought this was really interesting, the importance of a free and independent press.
Oh, yeah.
Journalists, they play a vital role in exposing these abuses, holding those in power accountable.
And that's exactly why it's so concerning that they're being increasingly targeted by spyware, right?
Yeah.
It's a direct attempt to silence dissent, control the narrative.
So it's not just about privacy. It's about freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the very foundations of a democracy.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening, to say the least. It's unsettling, sure, to realize how vulnerable we are in this digital age.
Yeah.
But I also feel, in a way, empowered, knowing there are steps we can take to protect ourselves and fight back.
Exactly.
I think Soynadie's work really is a call to action.
I agree.
He's urging us to be vigilant, to demand better, to work together to create a more secure and a more equitable digital future.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So, as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Even if you think you have nothing to hide, this erosion of privacy affects all of us.
Right.
It's not just about protecting individual secrets. It's about safeguarding the freedoms, the values we hold dear. Think about the steps you can take to become more aware of your own digital footprint, what you can do to support the fight for digital privacy and security. It's a fight worth having.